We welcome everyone to today's edition of the Step Up Your Safety series here at RES. I'm Therese Schulte, and I will be your moderator. I am also joined by one of our loss control consultants, Craig Fink, who will be doing the presentation on the invisible checklist. As we get started, just a couple of things. You've all entered with your phone and your computer audio muted. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen and type in your questions. We will address those at the end as time allows.
What we're going to talk about today is a little bit of a different topic than sometimes we dig into from a loss control perspective, but we want to look at known hazards and why do they keep the injuries from happening. And we're going to talk about a little bit about why good people still take risks under pressure. And then what really drives the choice to work safely or not work safely, because that's it's the behavior that really drives the injuries within work comp, within employment. So a little bit about myself. I really love when I have the slide that I talk about myself, but my name's Craig Fink. I'm a loss control consultant here with RES, and I'm based out of the state of Iowa. But I cover insured clients in the state of Iowa. But we also cover and speak to different industries and different topics around the region that RES works in. And I've been with RES for a little bit over a year right now. And as a loss control consultant, prior to that, I've been a safety person for the last 25 years. So I tell people, if you've met with me in the past, I tell people I'm a long-term safety geek. And so I was a boots on the ground safety person working. I started my career in transportation and trucking, and I worked in manufacturing, construction, and then just kind of moved into a similar role in my career in loss control, working around injury prevention and safety culture. And that's really what I enjoy the most is helping our insureds figure out how we can prevent injuries. It does say on there. So outside of the workplace, I do a lot of other goofy things. I'm a wrestling coach and I'm a search manager on a volunteer search and rescue team. And I use those safety and injury prevention tools, honestly, and all those aspects of my life as well. So, guys, um, is going to be talking about safety observations and what are your observations look like if you're doing them from a safety perspective? And as the employer, those observations can be vastly different around the who, the what, the why that you're looking for. But typically, when we talk about safety observations, we're talking about doing walkthroughs, and we get asked that as a loss control partner with our insureds. We will meet, we might go through loss trend analysis, and then we'll do, and what are we actually looking for when we do a walkthrough? What are you looking for as the employer? And obviously that's going to be quite different based off of potentially uh, what you do, what your industry is, the work that you do, the location. But are we looking for things that are going to be preventing injuries? And are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck? Because what we know, and if we do walkthroughs, and when I do walkthroughs, I typically don't have a checklist. And I just try to do as broad-based observations as I can around the environment, the known hazards, the visible hazards, and the behavior. But I would very much point out that having a checklist and having some process that you follow regularly is probably the best way to do it. We do have checklist tools that we use, but because I use them all the time, I don't have to have it pulled up, which is nice because I don't have my head in the paper or taking notes. But when we do checklists, oftentimes we look for the very common things. Um, and those common things can be things around like, are there puddles on the floor? Is the floor wet? Those kinds of things. And those are important, but oftentimes we can check all the boxes and everything is looking great on our walkthrough. And then a day later that day, somebody still gets injured. And then the question is why and how. So we want to make sure that we're the quote unquote acceptable conditions that we're measuring and observing those. But oftentimes it's not the equipment, it's not the water on the floor, it's not those things. The hazards that cause the injuries are oftentimes living in the decisions of the employee that gets hurt. So unfortunately, oftentimes our checklists don't capture what those decisions are. And oftentimes those decisions are made from habits and or behavior items that perhaps they've always done it, quote unquote. I've always done it this way and nothing bad's ever happened. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about how we can change and adapt our walkthroughs and what we look for when we do safety observations to try to reveal those hidden risks. Thank you, Therese, for pulling this up. So injuries are most often decision driven. And as we talk through what are the causations for injuries, and we often look at those things from the work comp perspective, and we talk about what's the most common, what's the frequency and severity driven by. And oftentimes, and this is for every industry, it doesn't matter if it's healthcare or the construction job sites, we talk about and we see slip, trips, and falls. And then we talk about strains and sprains. We talk about ergonomic issues or struggles. And those are three of the most common things that we see, regardless of what the industry is that you work in. But what we can't see oftentimes is what are the behavior decisions that have caused those injuries to happen, a slip, trip, and fall, or carrying something too heavy, or not carrying it correctly, or doing what I tend to do when I sit at my desk. I put my chair to the floor and I slouch and put my feet under my desk and stretch out, which is a very bad ergonomic position. Why do I make that decision? So what we know is shortcuts are often taken, but the why around why we might take shortcuts is typically to save time or reduce the effort. Um, Said this already, and we'll hear this, and I'm sure you hear this frequently when an employee gets injured. I've always done it this way, or this is how we've always done it. Depending on your industry, it might be something around production pressure, and production is different for everybody. That could be the widgets that you make in a manufacturing plant, and you have a goal, you have a production number, or it could be we need to get this project done, and it needs to get done in this amount of time or within this budget. Um, Oftentimes we create workarounds, and sometimes we don't actually realize that we created workarounds. And we've done it possibly by design, but sometimes we just cut the corners because it's the easy, quick, fast way to do it. So, and that's what drives a lot of our decisions. And we want to figure out how we can look at that, and maybe the best word is how we can measure that. So what we should be observing, and this is hard. Oftentimes I do a walkthrough and people on break, or it's the lunch break, or it's the slow time of the year. So sometimes we can't see this, but if it's your facility, if it's your job site, it should hopefully be easier to know when's the best time. When's the best time that people are working hardest? When's the time that we typically see the most unsafe behaviors or we have the most injuries? And so hopefully we can figure out what that time is and what the location is to best look at these things, but look at how that work is actually being performed. Not this is what the task as we described it to you, but how are you actually doing it? And then look at the body positioning. And it's not just the position, but it's also can be the timing, the sequence. I've got to pick this item up and put it here, and I do this with this item, and I grab this tool, those kinds of things. And we have a routine, but are we doing it the right way? Um, are we using PPE? And this is something we look at all the time, but are we not using the PPE? And I do this all the time. I put my glasses up on the top of my head. And so oftentimes I put my safety glasses up here sometimes as well. So do I have it? Am I using it? Did I forget it in the break room or the locker or my office? Or do I just really dislike PPE and I never have it on me? And that's more of a behavior piece. That's a decision. And then what are the decision points where the risk is introduced? And typically the piece that I look at here, or the example that I give most often, is around driving. And so we all make mistakes when we drive, because some of us would say I never make a mistake in the workplace, but we all make mistakes when we drive. So then the examples that I give, because we all tend to do it, is do you speed? And when do you find it okay to speed? At what point in time is it okay to go 5 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour over the speed limit versus 10? Or maybe you never do that and you only set your cruise control at 1 mile an hour. And do I always use my turn signal? How far before I change lanes do I use it? So those are the kinds of decision points where we want to try to figure out how to measure. And in driving, it's easy to understand it because we all drive. Most of us drive. And sometimes we don't realize the decisions we make. But in your workplace, where are some of the decisions being made? And where are those points occurring? So, and I think that's hard in the workplace, but it's can be the most important thing to figure out. So examples of unsafe behaviors, and this is kind of a goofy picture that you'll see here, but some the examples in the bullet points: lifting, pushing, pulling outside your neutral posture. I would like to think that I can lift up more than 50 pounds, but Can I? Should I? Should I pick it up from the ground and set it table height or counter height? Is that something that's even remotely safe for me? And why would I do it? Do I bypass guards at any point in time? And guard can be machine guarding. It could be other pieces too. Are there things that I do to speed up production or speed up my day at all? What are those? What are those steps that I do? I think we're all guilty of this one, choosing convenience over protection. Do I want to pause or stop what I'm doing to go get the right tool or the right person to assist me, or am I just going to get it done because I just want to get it done? Or maybe somebody told me get it done fast. And those are the kinds of behaviors that if very frequently we see behaviors like this, but if nothing bad happens, we might not address those bad behaviors or we might not write it down. And that's where the change really happens at the best for us is, okay, I've seen people doing this multiple times. I know they do it, but nobody's ever gotten hurt. So why would I even take a note about this? It's because at some juncture, not doing it the right way, whether that's a policy or a rule or a process that you followed, people continue to do that at some juncture, it will cause an injury most likely. And then that kind of rolls and is the same thing as the informal practices replacing the written procedures. Hopefully for things you have written procedures that are needed, whether that's because OSHA says you need to have a written procedure or it's to understand and help and train and educate. Hopefully there's procedures for those things that are needed. But oftentimes I go into workplaces and I ask, why are we doing this? I hear all kinds of stories about the why. And then I ask, do we have a process or a procedure in place? And a lot of times we hear yes. And then my next question is, if you have a process, why you're not following the process? At that point, the process doesn't make any sense, and the time and investment you put into it is not helping you. So maybe your process is not right, and it needs to be updated or it needs to make more sense. Maybe it's not shared with the right people in the right way, or maybe people just cut corners sometimes. If we look at the pictures, and this is a scaffolding in a construction work site, and I'd like to say that I would never see anything like the picture with the red X on the left side. I've seen that on job sites, not very often, but I've seen goofy things like that. And then the big question is, why would that ever happen? But maybe this employer doesn't have a scaffold. Or maybe the scaffold, the guy that's doing the painting work up high doesn't know how to put the scaffold up. Or maybe there's two folks that can stand on the plank to balance him when he's standing on that very scary looking plank, right? But none of those two people or the employee that's out there standing on the plank know how to put up a scaffold. It could be that simple. So those are choices, but they're behavior related choices. Because at that point, if you're the guy that's standing on the plank doing the painting, and you have all those reasons why you didn't put a scaffold up to do it in the way that's going to really reduce the risk of injury, um, the biggest thing there is you just made a choice. You could have said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to stand on a plank. I'm not going to get this done until I've got the scaffolding. And that's a behavior decision. So why this matters? Because if we look at behaviors, if we do walkthroughs and we make observations and then we track these kinds of behaviors, we know that we can get enough better information, more quantitative information to reinforce corrective decisions. Um, it's very easy to say, stop doing that. Why? Because I told you so, or because you're not following the rule. But it's even better if we can say, hey, we need to not wait till something happens or wait till the observation is done. Every time I go into this department or on this job site, I see people not using the ladder or people running or whatever the decisions are. The more of that we can see, realize, and give feedback, the better. Also, if we can give that kind of feedback before an injury happens, we build trust and the organization starts to balance more around injury prevention. As we do this, it also can reveal what the systems are that enable safety, or maybe what the systems are and the system failures that disable safety. And um, I think everybody understands and realizes, and most people want to be preventative. They don't want to be just responding when an injury happens. But how do I measure things and measure the right things in a good fashion to be able to identify systems that are good and are making people safe, or maybe that we need to do some upgrade and work on to help people be safer. Um, the other piece is if we're doing the observations and we're doing behavior observations, it's always amazing to me. I will see similar unsafe decisions around people that don't do the same things sometimes, or they work in a different department, but all of a sudden they're making the similar decisions. And their why might be different, but now I can have it's not just this one person doing this one task in this one department that's unsafe. I've now seen a similar behavior 6 times in 6 different places across 3 days. And we need to figure out, we need to maybe share some different information and share this with the entire team. And that's where we start to find better success. So here's one of the pieces that's always hard. And this in my career, that this is the piece that I probably had to work on more than anything when I realized how important behavior was and started doing safety behavior observations. Then how do I make these observations, identify an unsafe behavior, and then go to the person that's identified or sharing with the group where the behaviors have been identified maybe multiple times and making people feel like they're not being blamed for things. Um, because we don't want to have behavior observations be a blame game. And so one of the things I like to do if I see somebody and whether that's where I've worked in the past as a safety person or whether that's if I'm doing a walkthrough with one of my insureds and I observe something. But my question is, oftentimes I like to start with why. And you look at this question, so ask what makes this task hard to do safely. But if I typically would start with a why question. So like, why did you make that decision? And do you understand this? It's not what 25 years ago where I started in safety when somebody had a bad accident or made a bad decision. It was all about the rules. Did you understand the rule? Did you know there was a rule? If you don't follow the rule, something bad is going to happen. You're going to get written up or might get suspended or you might be terminated. It was all about the rules. And now we want to talk about the risks. So I'd like to ask people, hey, do you understand why that could hurt you? What I just observed, why that could hurt you? What's making you change your task and your behavior? And do you have like, what is the why? Um, Document what you see. Um, Write down, I observe this behavior. And oftentimes in organizations, and it really depends on what your culture looks like internally, right? But sometimes you don't have to put a name. I observed 5 times a day, I observed the PPE not being worn correctly. And maybe I had the conversations with the employees, and hopefully I am having the conversation with my employee, letting them know like, hey, so we need you to be wearing your safety glasses, et cetera. But I'm not necessarily going to be putting all that information, all the names in a database. Now, that's easy for me to say because I've been a safety guy in my career. If I see the same person over and over again having unsafe behavior, then yeah, we might have to make a shift around, okay, we've had this discussion 7 times. Why are you still making the same decisions? Those are different discussions, but the kind of the low hanging fruit piece here is when I see somebody and I realize they're being unsafe, then through conversation, they realize they're being unsafe. Typically, you see behavior adjustments pretty easily without having to be disciplinary. Sometimes you do, though. We do want to separate that coaching from the discipline piece because oftentimes those get kind of pushed together. And again, early in my career, it was we were disciplinary oriented kind of safety cultures, and that was not just where I was at. I think that was most common. And now we really try to focus on coaching. How can I coach? How can I? And I really like to ask this question: what do you think you should be doing better or differently? So we want to try to be consistent, and I think that's the other piece. And like I said, when I do walkthroughs, I don't typically use my device. I've got a walkthrough observation checklist um, on a device. I can do it on a phone or an iPad and things, and I might take pictures. And typically, I would ask folks when I'm doing a walkthrough, okay, I'd like to take some pictures. Typically, I don't want to take pictures of your employees unless we have a conversation. We talk to them and ask, but we try to be very consistent with what we look for and how we put that into some type of a report we can share with you. But I don't like to focus on that. I mean, typically you'll see me carrying a device around. I'll take pictures. I might start scribbling a little bit of notes, but I try not to be rigid with that. And I oftentimes I get asked, "What do you want to see?" Like, what do you want to show me? And because one, from my perspective, you know the workforce and the environment better than I do. But I think that's trying to have some structure is fantastic, but don't make it so rigid that you're going to have your head down focusing only on what you just stepped on or stepped over. Kind of a broad spectrum. Um, Rotate, and I think this is also important in a facility. As a safety person, yeah, I want to make sure that everything that the employees are working on or the environments they're working in is safe for them. But if I do the same walkthrough every day or every week or every month even, sometimes that just I start I start to or I stop seeing things because a better set of eyes, a different set of eyes, and taking a little bit of time sometimes between the last time I walk through here. Sometimes that's the best thing to do to have the observations. The other piece is the adaptation piece. Sometimes we're going to focus on different areas where we know we've got the risk and hazards, and maybe we rotate around there. We don't always have to look at the same thing all the time. And adapting that is going to be good. So also looking for patterns. So again, patterns can be slips, trips, and falls. So what drives our slips, trips, and falls? And sometimes that is purely the simple piece of people keep tripping over things, whether those are cracks in the sidewalk or things that shouldn't be stored on the floor, those kinds of things. But what else are we looking for? Is everything always the same? Probably not. There's probably patterns that are similar, but if we only focus on the one-off events, we tend to then be blind. We put our blinders on and we're just hyper focused. And these kinds of walkthroughs and observations, I would say take your blinders off and have a broad spectrum of what you're looking at. So who should do the behavior observations? And I would say everybody. Try to figure out how you can get people and rotate through because you're going to find a lot of really good information around how different people observe things. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish and how you are getting the information recorded down or how you get the data, um, but also how you interact with people if you do find something that's unsafe or a bad behavior. So, and everybody's going to be a little bit different with that, but it's important, I think, to have a variety of people. So supervisors are closest to the work, and oftentimes they have a different focus than the behavior they are seeing. They might be looking at the results of the work themselves, whether that's a product or a project. But if you ask them to do some behavior observations, oftentimes they might have to take a little bit of a step back, but they'll see things that maybe they've seen them before, but they were so busy they didn't realize it. Safety professionals or whoever has a safety role in your organization, and that can be a broad variety of people, excuse me. Um, we can be doing observations and then also coaching. And that's typically for the person that has that safety role, that's part of their role is to coach. But I also think it's important to have people that are maybe in a leadership role above in your organization, the supervisors. It's also great if folks like that can do a walkthrough and a behavior observation as well, not to get people in trouble or not to have it be negative, but it shows that they have priorities around safety and safe behavior and the safety culture. But the one I think is probably one of the most important is, and if we were talking purely about safety culture, I think safety culture is a top down, but it has to be a bottom up as well, kind of a mentality. So the leaders um, and driving safety culture through the organization, pushing that out to everybody, but also peers working for each other to try to keep them safe, try to do behavior observations. And sometimes those are you have to coach who might be doing your safety observations and coach them up a little bit like, hey, you're not there to get people in trouble. You're not there to point a finger. You're not out there. You're out there if you see something and you understand it. Um, one, we want to make sure we can track those observations. But two, it's okay to go to somebody and say, hey, like, you don't want to get in trouble and you certainly don't want to get injured. Take your safety and make sure you remember to wear your safety glasses. Um, and hopefully that's done in a way that they appreciate that. And again, it's different in every organization. And always there's going to be some person or some group of people that don't want to have a peer observing them. It can be a hard culture shift, but I think it's can be one of the most important and um, one of the best culture shifts that can happen in an organization if you can get there. It can be a tough journey, but when you can get to that place, it's amazing because people are now starting to support each other in ways that they've maybe never done before. And all of a sudden, things just get really, they just improve typically. So how often does observation work? So I would say make it short and sweet. I've gone in places where behavior observations can be hours, and that's no fun for the person doing it. It's really no fun for all the people that are being observed. And it kind of goes back, and this would be like an old school, like a 1970s or 1960s, probably before OSHA kind of mentality, where on a production floor, everybody that's in charge is in this office that's up above, and they have windows and they can look down on the production floor, and they're always looking. And if you look up, there's always somebody looking down at you, and that's really hard to do, and we don't see it very often in today's world. But We certainly don't want our behavior observations to be thought of like that. Oh my gosh, everybody's just looking at me all the time to get me in trouble. That's not going to go well. So keep them short and sweet. Do them relatively frequently, not daily necessarily, but relatively frequently. Have a cadence and have a cadence around the observations, but also have a cadence around how you share what those observations have found. One of the tools, one of my experiences was we had every employee needed to do, there was a behavior observation number. Every employee had to do that every month. And actually, they had to do multiple behavior observations, fill out a form every single month. And it was working well. We were getting a vast majority of data and information, and we could guide some things around orientation and different training and even pre-shift meetings. Those sorts of things were great. But what we didn't do is we didn't have a lot of good cadence around sharing what we found out. And so employees would come like, okay, I've done 4 observations this month and I submitted them. And what happened to my submissions? Like, what are we actually doing with it? Because we were focusing on um, potentially other things and we didn't have a cadence. So we realized, oh, we probably want to share what everybody's doing, what everybody's seeing, or we can categorize and figure that out. So um, higher risk work, depending on what you do, what your industry is, and what your locations look like, you might want to do higher frequency. On job sites that I've been on and been the safety person for in construction, every day we were doing safety observations because we might have people doing work from heights. I had people sitting in rope seats because they had to descend down ropes to do some of the work. I mean, there were some high risk things. We're going to do behavior observations routinely and frequently. That might not be what you need, but do them consistently and kind of figure out what that frequency is going to be best for you. So turning these observations into prevention. So again, I think number one, this is very, very important. Track repeated decisions and those repeated unsafe behaviors. Don't track the individuals. Now, again, if it's the same person every single time that you have to go to and say, stop doing that, yeah, needs to be some coaching there and probably some other action maybe. But I wouldn't, nobody's going to like this. Nobody's going to want to do it. Nobody's going to like when it's done and they're observed if they think it's always their name and their face that's going into the report. Or now everybody knows every time you walk by, I'm not being safe. And that kind of safety culture is not going to get you very far. Um, and identify, and this can be hard. It's not just I saw this behavior, this unsafe behavior, but asking the why question. So why did you make this decision to do this unsafe behavior? Um, that can be difficult. But if we just track the behaviors, we're gonna get into a good place. It's gonna continue to drive us very well into improving culture and identifying things we want to work on. But if we continue to ask those questions, and those are going to get us a little bit further to understand the why. Prioritize the fixes. So you can't fix everything at once. And sometimes the fixes are easy and sometimes they're not, and sometimes they're costly and whatnot. So prioritize that and then share with the people, your employees, this is what we have identified. This is how we're thinking we're going to fix this. And here's what we think the time frame is going to look like. And again, all of a sudden the culture starts to improve. And as in my experience, as this cultures improve, all of a sudden I start to have people lining up and walking into my office to say, hey, this is what I saw today. I'm not doing an observation today. This is what I saw, and I think this is how we might be able to fix it. And people start coming to you. And that's a great culture shift. It can pile some things onto the things that you need to get done onto your work, maybe as a leader or whatever your role is, but it starts to improve. Then after a while, it does start to get easier. We want to measure the reduction in exposure, not just the incidents. We measure lots of things in the safety world, and everybody in your business, you have your own KPIs, the things you measure, the key performance indicators. But how do we reduce the exposures? And sometimes that's not quantitative, or it can be, but we used to see this hazard this number of times. Now we see it half. Is that reducing the injuries? Maybe, maybe not quite yet. Hopefully it will. Maybe only had one injury here ever with this hazard, but we keep seeing unsafe behavior around it. And that one injury maybe was a bad injury. So we've got to figure out what the measurement is that makes the most sense for us. But it's great because you've got to win if you can reduce the exposure to a hazard and then share that with your employees. They will love that from a culture perspective. So some key takeaways. Injuries are rarely accidents. And I love this statement. Their decisions, and I wish I could take the credit. I've heard this multiple times in my career. I don't think there's any one person that I could say said this for the first time, but injuries are rarely accidents. They're decisions in context. Um, it's it's like getting pulled over if you're driving in safely. And oftentimes a police officer might ask you, "So why'd you run that stoplight?" I don't know. And oftentimes we don't know. We don't realize even that we did it or why we did it. The same thing. Oftentimes the injuries that occur, we don't understand why they happen or why we have made that decision. But the more observations we do around behaviors, the better we can figure out and find the context of why people are doing what they're doing. Um, Oftentimes the most serious risks are often invisible on checklists. I I don't have everything on my checklist. I can't get everything on my checklist. And oftentimes we can check all the boxes. Everything is okay or everything's a Y on the checklist, and people will still get hurt. And why is that? Because oftentimes those checklists maybe are not identifying the serious risks, or they are perhaps, but we don't understand why that risk and that behavior might mesh together to cause an injury. Observing behaviors reveals how work really happens. And I think that's great because what we measure, and a lot of times our KPIs are things that are not behavior related. They're the results of the behavior. If you work quickly, then production gets done in a more timely fashion, and maybe we can do more than we had, um, do it more quickly, whatever that might be. But those behavior observations can be driving a lot of other things as well. And the more we can learn about the behavior, the actual behavior, the better. So prevention improves, and prevention of injuries, prevention of near misses improves when the systems support safe decisions. And we want to support safe decisions. We don't want to tell people um, this message. And again, early in my career, this is the message I gave as a safety person: do what you're told or else. I might not have said it exactly like that, but that was the message they were hearing when people were getting terminated or written up, or um, they could get suspended for whatever they did. And nobody's going to really improve their behavior just because that's the only message that they hear. So if we can identify what the decisions are that we're seeing and why they need to improve in a way that people understand, um, then all of a sudden prevention is the path that we're on instead of just being able to respond when bad things happen. So, are there any questions or feedback? And I don't know, looking at the Q&A piece here, and will we get the checklist today? So I can send some templates out about some things from a checklist perspective. And I would say it's a template that you will want to adapt to your certainly to your organization, what you do and how you do it. But yeah, we can definitely share some templates out. I'm not entirely sure what the best way to do that is for the person that asked that question. We can send it directly to you, but we can also share with attendees as well. I will look at what we have in our portal as well. We do have some templates for a variety of things in our portal, but a lot of the checklists typically that we have, that others have, are more around the checking the box for the environmental and condition kind of walkthroughs. I see something else that says templates would be great. Thank you. So yeah, we'll try to get some things shared around behavior observations. And you're always able to reach out to either myself, or if you've got a loss control consultant you've worked with in the past with us, Therese. Um, uh, with here at RES, this is our culture and mentality. If you got questions and you got contact, even if you fire that over to somebody, if you fire a claim question to me, I'll find the right person for you in claims, or a loss control question to your claim person that you're working with. They'll get it over to the right person in loss control. That's one of our goals, is to always get you where you need to be with your questions. So.
Thank you for joining us today. A couple of things before we end. I want to make sure that you are aware we will be sending a link out that you will be able to review the recorded webinar on our YouTube page. It will also be on our portal with any correlating documents. Don't forget that we are available on LinkedIn. Again, thank you for attending and being our partner.